The zip ties had cut deep into Rhiannon Vale's wrists, leaving angry red welts that burned with every movement. But pain was nothing compared to the terror that had consumed her for the past 18 hours in the basement of the abandoned warehouse. Now, crouched behind a rusted shipping container in the industrial district of Millbrook, she could hardly believe she was free. Her bare feet slapped against the cold concrete as she ran through the maze of empty buildings, her torn dress catching on chain-link fences and broken glass. The October wind cut through the thin fabric, but adrenaline kept her moving. Behind her, somewhere in the darkness, Donovan Kresh was probably discovering her escape by now. Rhiannon's mind raced as she stumbled toward the distant glow of streetlights. She had to get to the police, had to tell them everything. About the kidnapping outside her apartment complex 3 nights ago. About the warehouse where Kresh had kept her chained to a pipe. About his plans to sell her to human traffickers operating out of the port. But mostly, she had to tell them about what she'd found in that basement before she escaped. The discovery that changed everything as she reached the main road. A patrol car's headlights swept across her battered form. Relief flooded through her as she waved frantically, tears streaming down her dirt-stained cheeks. The cruiser pulled over, and Officer Marcus Hendley stepped out, his hand instinctively moving to his weapon when he saw her condition. "Please," Rhiannon gasped, collapsing against the hood of the car. "I was kidnapped. I escaped. He's still out there. Donovan Kresh. The warehouse, on Pier Street." Hendley's expression shifted from caution to concern as he took in her injuries, the zip tie marks, the terror in her eyes. He called for backup and an ambulance, wrapping his jacket around her trembling shoulders. "You're safe now," he assured her. "Can you tell me what happened?" Through chattering teeth, Rhiannon began her story. How Kresh had grabbed her from the parking garage, drugged her, held her captive. How she'd managed to work free from her restraints when he'd left to meet with his buyers. How she'd run through the maze of industrial buildings until she found the road. But she didn't mention the room she'd discovered while trying to find an exit. The room filled with photographs, documents, and evidence that painted a picture far more sinister than simple human trafficking. Evidence that connected Donovan Kresh to a series of disappearances spanning 5 years. Evidence that also connected him to Detective Lieutenant Cassian Rourke of the Millbrook Police Department at the hospital as nurses cleaned her wounds and doctors examined her injuries. Rhiannon wrestled with what she'd learned. The photographs showed Rourke meeting with Kresh, exchanging envelopes, shaking hands. The documents detailed payments, schedules, and a list of names women who had vanished without a trace. She'd escaped from more than just a kidnapper. She'd stumbled into a conspiracy that reached into the very institution she'd thought would protect her. As dawn broke over Millbrook, Rhiannon made a decision that would change everything. She would tell the truth, all of it, no matter the consequences. But first, she needed to get back to that warehouse and retrieve the evidence before Kresh could destroy it. What she didn't know was that her escape had already set in motion a chain of events that would turn her from victim to suspect in a matter of hours. The hunters had become the hunted, and Rhiannon Vale was about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous predators wear badges. Detective Lieutenant Cassian Rourke stood in the empty warehouse basement, his jaw clenched as he surveyed the scene. Broken zip ties lay scattered on the concrete floor, and a chain hung loose from the pipe where Rhiannon Vale had been held. But it was the open door to the back room that made his blood run cold. The room was empty now, stripped clean, but Rourke knew exactly what had been stored there 5 years worth of insurance policies that could destroy him and half the police department. His phone buzzed. "Rourke, Lieutenant, we found the Vale woman." Officer Hendley's voice crackled through the speaker. "She's at Mercy General. Claims she was kidnapped by someone named Donovan Kresh." Rourke's grip tightened on the phone. "I'll be right there." At the hospital, Rhiannon sat on the edge of the examination bed, her mind racing. She'd convinced the nurses she needed to use the restroom, but instead, she'd slipped out to the parking garage where she'd hidden the manila envelope she'd grabbed from Cresh's evidence room. The photographs and documents were safely stashed in her car if she could just get to them. Miss Vale, a tall man in an expensive suit, appeared in the doorway. I'm Detective Lieutenant Cassian Rourke. I understand you've been through a terrible ordeal. Rhiannon's blood turned to ice. The man from the photographs stood before her, his cold blue eyes studying her with predatory intensity. She forced her expression to remain neutral, her voice steady. Yes, I was kidnapped by a man named Donovan Cresh. He held me in a warehouse on Pier Street. Rourke pulled up a chair, positioning himself between her and the door. Can you describe this warehouse? We'll need to process it for evidence. It's the old Meridian shipping building, basement level. He had me chained to a pipe. She watched his face carefully, noting the slight tension around his eyes. I managed to escape when he left to meet someone. Meet someone. Rourke's voice remained casual, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped his notepad. Did he say who? His business partner? I think. Something about finalizing a deal. Rhiannon leaned forward slightly. Detective, I think there might be other victims. I saw ... things ... in that basement. Documents, photographs, evidence of other missing women. The color drained from Rourke's face, but he maintained his composure. What kind of evidence? I only got a glimpse before I ran, but there were files, names, dates. It looked like he'd been doing this for years. She paused, watching him carefully. You might want to check if any of those names match your missing persons cases. Rourke stood abruptly. We'll certainly investigate. But right now, I need you to come to the station and give a full statement. The sooner we get your story on record, the better. Of course, Rhiannon agreed, though every instinct screamed at her to run. But can I stop by my apartment first? I'd like to change clothes, get cleaned up. I'm afraid that's not possible. This is a kidnapping case. We need your statement while the details are fresh. Don't worry about your appearance. The pressure in his tone made it clear this wasn't a request. Rhiannon nodded, her mind working frantically. She needed to get word to someone about the evidence, but who could she trust? At the police station, Rourke led her to interview room B, a windowless box with a metal table and 2 chairs. This is just a formality, he assured her, though he positioned himself between her and the exit once again. Detective Thorne will be conducting the interview. Detective Valeria Thorne entered minutes later, a sharp-featured woman with penetrating dark eyes. She carried a thick file and wore an expression that made Rhiannon's stomach drop. Ms. Vale, Thorne began, her voice crisp and professional. We've had some interesting developments in your case. Developments? We searched the warehouse you described. It was completely empty. No evidence of anyone being held there recently. Thorne opened the file, revealing a series of photographs. However, we did find something interesting at your apartment. The photographs showed Rhiannon's living room, but it wasn't as she'd left it. Newspapers covered every surface, with articles about missing women circled in red. A corkboard hung on the wall, connected by red string to photographs of the disappeared women. This wasn't in my apartment, Rhiannon whispered, staring at the fabricated crime scene. We also found this in your bedroom. Thorne slid another photo across the table. It showed a handwritten journal, supposedly in Rhiannon's handwriting, detailing fantasies about making women disappear. Rhiannon's hands shook as she realized the trap closing around her. They weren't just covering up their crimes, they were making her the scapegoat. I've never seen that journal before in my life, Rhiannon said, her voice barely above a whisper. The interview room felt smaller with each passing minute, the walls seeming to close in as Detective Thorne laid out photograph after photograph. Of fabricated evidence? Your fingerprints are all over it, Thorne replied coolly, sliding another image across the table, along with your DNA on the binding. Rhiannon stared at the crime scene photos of her own apartment, transformed into the lair of a serial killer. Someone had been very thorough, very professional. This is impossible. I was kidnapped. I have injuries, the zip tie marks, the bruises. Self-inflicted wounds aren't uncommon in cases like this. Detective Rourke interjected from his position by the door. People create elaborate scenarios to cover their tracks. Cases like what? Rhiannon's voice rose. What exactly are you accusing me of? Thorne leaned back in her chair, studying Rhiannon with clinical detachment. 7 women have disappeared in Millbrook over the past 5 years. Lacey Merritt, Indira Vasquez, Brennan Foster, Octavia Hale, Delphine Cross, Aurelia Swift, and most recently, Juniper Knox. Each name hit Rhiannon like a physical blow. She recognized them from the files she'd seen in Kresh's evidence room, the same files that now seemed to be missing. All of them were last seen in locations you frequented, Thorne continued. The coffee shop where you worked part-time, the gym you attended, the library where you volunteered. That's circumstantial, Rhiannon protested, though she could hear the desperation creeping into her voice. Half the city uses those places, perhaps. But combined with what we found in your apartment and your elaborate kidnapping story, Thorne shrugged. It paints a clear picture. Rhiannon's mind raced. The evidence in her Cartha photographs of Rourke meeting with Kreshe, the documents detailing their operation, was her only hope. But how could she retrieve it from police custody? I want a lawyer, she said firmly. Of course, Rourke nodded. But first, there's someone who wants to see you. The door opened, and a man Rhiannon had never seen before entered. Tall and lean, with prematurely gray hair and kind eyes. He carried himself with the authority of someone high up the chain of command. Ms. Vale, I'm Captain Montgomery Ashford. I've been following your case with great interest. Rhiannon studied his face, searching for any sign of deception. Unlike Rourke and Thorne, Ashford seemed genuinely concerned, rather than predatory. Captain, I know how this looks, but I'm telling the truth. I was kidnapped by Donovan Kresh. He had evidence photographs, documents that connected him to these disappearances, and it also connected him to Detective Rourke. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Rourke stepped forward, his hand moving instinctively toward his weapon. That's a serious accusation, Ms. Vale, Ashford said quietly. Do you have any proof? I had proof, but when I escaped, I could only grab one envelope. It's hidden. She stopped herself, realizing her mistake. If Ashford was part of the conspiracy, she'd just signed her death warrant. Hidden where? Rourke demanded. Ashford held up a hand, silencing his lieutenant. Miss Vale, I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to think very carefully before you answer. His eyes locked with hers, and she saw something there, warning, perhaps even hope. If you had evidence that could prove your innocence, where would be the safest place to hide it? The question was clearly a code, but Rhiannon didn't understand it. She glanced between the 3 detectives, trying to read their expressions. Thorne looked confused, Rourke suspicious, but Ashford looked like a man trying to save her life. I would hide it somewhere public, she said slowly, somewhere with security cameras and witnesses. Ashford nodded almost imperceptibly. That would be wise. Captain Rourke interrupted. We have enough evidence to charge her. The journal, the crime scene at her apartment, evidence that conveniently appeared after her alleged escape, Ashford observed. Detective Rourke, have you considered that someone might be trying to frame Ms. Vale? Sir, with respect, the evidence speaks for itself, does it? Ashford pulled out his phone and showed the screen to everyone in the room. It displayed a text message timestamped from 2 hours ago. Package delivered to Post Office Box 247. Security footage confirms identity. Rhiannon's heart hammered as she realized what Ashford was telling her. Someone had already retrieved the evidence from her car. Detective Thorne Ashford continued, I'm releasing Ms. Vale pending further investigation. We clearly need to examine all the evidence more carefully. Captain, I must protest, Rourke began. Your protest is noted. Ashford's tone cut through the room like a blade. Ms. Vale, you're free to go. But don't leave town. As Rhiannon stood on shaky legs, Ashford handed her a business card. On the back, written in pencil, was an address and a time. Riverside Park, Pier 7, midnight. Walking out of the police station felt surreal. Freedom, but not really. She was a suspect now. Her face would be all over the news within hours. But someone, Captain Ashford, was trying to help her. The question was, could she trust him? The wind off the river carried the scent of industrial waste and rotting fish as Rhiannon approached Pier 7. Midnight in Riverside Park was not a place for the faint of heart. Homeless camps dotted the shoreline, and drug deals happened in the shadows between the abandoned shipping containers. But it was also the last place anyone would expect a police captain to meet a suspect. Captain Montgomery Ashford emerged from behind a concrete pillar, his civilian clothes making him blend into the urban decay. In his hand was a manila envelope, the same one Rhiannon had hidden in her car. You retrieved it, she breathed, relief flooding through her. My partner did, Ashford replied, glancing around to ensure they were alone. Agent Celeste Nakamura, FBI. We've been investigating the Millbrook Police Department for 8 months. FBI. Rhiannon's world tilted again. You're not really a police captain. Oh, I am. 23 years on the force. But 6 months ago, I discovered what Rourke and his crew were doing, and I reached out to the Bureau. He handed her the envelope. These photographs and documents are exactly what we needed. Rhiannon opened the envelope with trembling fingers. The evidence was all. There are photos of Rourke meeting with Kresh, bank records showing payments, and, most damning of all, a list of the missing women with notations about their sales prices. Human trafficking, she whispered. Worse than that, Rourke wasn't just taking bribes to look the other way. He was actively recruiting victims, using his position to identify vulnerable women, then feeding information to Kresh about their routines, their isolation, their likelihood to be missed. The full horror of it hit her. The coffee shop, the gym, the library. He knew I went to those places because he was watching me. You were supposed to be victim number 8, Ashford confirmed grimly. But something went wrong with the operation. Kresh got sloppy, or maybe he got greedy. Either way, you managed to escape and find evidence that could destroy their entire network. So they decided to frame me instead. Rhiannon felt sick. Make me the serial killer. Tie up all the loose ends. Exactly. By tomorrow morning, you would have been charged with 7 counts of first-degree murder. The evidence they planted in your apartment was very convincing. Ashford smiled for the first time since she'd met him. Agent Nakamura and her team are executing search warrants as we speak. Rourke's house, his bank accounts, his personal files. We've also got surveillance teams on 3 other officers we suspect are involved. A car pulled up behind them, headlights cutting through the darkness. Rhiannon tensed, but Ashford remained calm as an Asian woman in a FBI windbreaker approached them. Agent Nakamura, I presume, Rhiannon said. Ms. Vale, I'm sorry for what you've been through. Nakamura's voice was warm but professional. Your escape and the evidence you recovered has broken this case wide open. What happens now? Now we need you to disappear for a few days, Ashford said. Rourke knows you have evidence, but he doesn't know we've already copied it. We need him to make some moves, get desperate enough to expose the rest of his network. Disappear how? My face will be all over the news by morning. Nakamura pulled out a tablet, showing Rhiannon a news report already being broadcast. The headline read, Suspected serial killer dies in car crash during police pursuit. As of 2 hours ago, Rhiannon Vale is dead, Nakamura explained. Car went off Riverside Bridge, body swept away by the current. Very tragic. Rhiannon stared at her own supposed death notice. How did you? We have resources, Ashford said simply. The crash was staged. The news report is real. As far as the world knows, you died trying to escape justice. Which means Rourke and his people will let their guard down, Nakamura added. They'll think the threat is gone, start cleaning up loose ends. That's when we'll grab them. But what about Donovan Kresh? He's still out there. Ashford's expression darkened. Actually, Kresh was found dead in his apartment 3 hours ago. Single gunshot to the head, made to look like suicide. Very professional. The implications hit Rhiannon like a sledgehammer. Rourke had him killed. Almost certainly. Which means you're the only witness left alive. The only person who can testify about what you saw in that warehouse. So what do I do? Just hide while you build your case? We have a safe house, Nakamura said. Federal protection, new identity, if necessary. But there is one thing we need. From you first. Rhiannon waited. We need you to help us catch them in the act, Ashford said. One more operation to expose the entire network. Absolutely not. The refusal came automatically. I'm not putting myself in danger again. Hear us out, Nakamura pleaded. We've identified their next target. A woman named Esmeralda Quinlan, works at the university library. Lives alone, no family in the area. She fits their victim profile perfectly. Then warn her. Put her in protective custody. We could do that, Ashford agreed. But then we'd only get Rourke, and maybe 1 or 2 others. The buyers, the transport network, the offshore accounts, all of that disappears. Rhiannon understood what they were asking. Use herself as bait to draw out the entire conspiracy. I'll think about it, she said finally. But as they drove toward the safe house, she already knew her answer. 7 women were dead, and their families deserved justice. Esmeralda Quinlan deserved protection, and Rhiannon Vale deserved her life back. The safe house was a modest 2-bedroom apartment in the suburbs. The kind of place that would blend invisibly into any middle-class neighborhood. Agent Nakamura had stocked it with groceries, clean clothes, and enough surveillance equipment to run a small war. For 3 days, Rhiannon watched the news reports about her own death, while FBI technicians explained the plan. She would pose as Esmeralda Quinlan's new roommate, using falsified documents and a carefully crafted backstory. When Rourke's people came for Esmeralda, they would capture Rhiannon instead, except this time, she'd be wearing a wire and surrounded by federal agents. The risk is minimal, Agent Nakamura assured her for the 100th time. We'll have eyes on you, 24/7, audio surveillance, and a tactical team positioned within 60 seconds of your location. Minimal risk, Rhiannon repeated flatly. Like the minimal risk of being kidnapped in my own parking garage. That was different. This time we're controlling every variable. Rhiannon studied the surveillance photos of Esmeralda Quinlan spread across the kitchen table. 26 years old, graduate student in art history, worked part-time at the university library. She lived alone in a converted warehouse apartment in the arts district, isolated, vulnerable, perfect for Rourke's purposes. You're sure she's the next target? The pattern is consistent. Agent Fowler, Nakamura's tech specialist, confirmed from behind his laptop. Rourke's been running surveillance on her for 2 weeks. Credit card tracking, phone records, even garbage analysis. They know her entire routine, and they don't suspect she's under federal protection. We've been very careful, Nakamura said. No obvious surveillance. No contact with local law enforcement. As far as Rourke knows, she's just another potential victim. That afternoon, Rhiannon moved into Esmeralda's apartment under the identity of Rebecca Winters, a freelance graphic designer who needed temporary housing while looking for her own place. Esmeralda was kind but distracted, buried in her thesis research about stolen art during World War II. I mostly work nights at the library, Esmeralda explained as they shared Chinese takeout. You'll have the place to yourself most evenings. Just keep the noise down, the walls are thin. Rhiannon nodded, acutely aware of the tiny microphone taped to her collarbone and the GPS tracker sewn into her jacket. In her earpiece, Agent Nakamura's voice provided constant reassurance. We're here, you're safe. But safety felt like an illusion. As night fell over the arts district, the converted warehouse sat on a quiet street, lined with similar buildings, most of them empty after business hours. Perfect hunting ground for predators. On the second night, the hunters made their move. Rhiannon was in the kitchen, washing dishes and pretending to read a magazine, when she heard the sound of a van pulling up outside. Through the blinds, she could see 3 men in dark clothing moving toward the building's entrance. Contact, she whispered into her microphone. 3 subjects approaching the building. Copy that. Nakamura's voice crackled in her earpiece. Tactical team is moving into position. Stay calm, follow the plan. The plan was simple. Let them take her. Activate the panic button once they were in the van, and lead the FBI directly to the trafficking network's headquarters. What could go wrong? Everything, as it turned out. The apartment door exploded inward, and 3 masked figures rushed in with military precision. But instead of zip ties and chloroform, they carried automatic weapons. FBI. Everyone on the ground, one of them shouted. Rhiannon's blood turned to ice as she realized the truth. These weren't Rourke's people. These were Rourke's people pretending to be FBI, using the fake raid as cover for the kidnapping. Rebecca Winters, the lead figure, called out, his voice muffled by the tactical mask. You're under arrest for the murder of Rhiannon Vale. They knew. Somehow, they knew she was alive. You have the right to remain silent, he continued, approaching her with handcuffs. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The words were right, but everything else was wrong. Real FBI agents would have identified themselves by name and badge number. They would have read her Miranda rights before announcing the charges, and they certainly wouldn't be conducting an arrest in full tactical gear at night. Where's Agent Nakamura? Rhiannon demanded, backing toward the kitchen counter where she'd hidden a knife. Agent who? The fake FBI leader tilted his head. Ma'am, you need to come with us. Now. In her earpiece, silence. The surveillance team was either compromised or dead. Rhiannon grabbed the knife and backed toward the fire escape. But the second, masked figure was already there, blocking her exit. She was trapped. Don't make this harder than it has to be, the leader said, his voice now carrying a familiar tone that made her stomach drop. She knew that voice. Hello, Rhiannon, Detective Lieutenant Cassian, Rourke said, pulling off his mask. We need to talk. Behind him, his 2 accomplices removed their masks as well. Officers she recognized from the police station. Men who had sworn to protect and serve, now pointing weapons at an innocent woman. How did you find me? Rourke smiled coldly. Did you really think we didn't have people inside the FBI? Agent Nakamura has been very helpful, even if she doesn't know it. The betrayal hit harder than the kidnapping had. There was no rescue coming. No backup plan. No one she could trust. What do you want? The same thing I've always wanted, Rourke replied. To clean up loose ends. The abandoned meat processing plant on the outskirts of Millbrook had been closed for over a decade, but the smell of death still lingered in its concrete walls. Rourke's men had dragged Rhiannon through a maze of rusted machinery and hanging chains to a small office in the back, where a single bare bulb cast harsh shadows across water-stained walls. 7 years, Rourke said, settling into a chair across from where they'd tied her to a metal beam. 7 years building the perfect operation. Do you have any idea how much money we've made? Rhiannon tested her bonds, but the rope was professional grade, tied by someone who knew what they were doing. I don't care about your money. $12 million, he continued, as if she hadn't spoken. 12 million from the sale of 37 women. Not just local girls, we had a whole pipeline running from Seattle to Miami. 37, the number was higher than she'd imagined. The 7 who made the news were just the ones whose disappearances couldn't be covered up. The others, ... runaways, addicts, illegal immigrants. No one misses them. Rourke leaned forward. It was a perfect system until you stumbled into that warehouse. Where's Agent Nakamura? Agent Nakamura is exactly where she's supposed to be, in FBI headquarters, reviewing the evidence from your death. She has no idea her surveillance team was compromised. Rourke smiled. Officer Hendley has been very useful in that regard. The betrayal ran deeper than Rhiannon had feared. Hendley was the officer who had first found her on the road, who had seemed so concerned for her safety. How many people in law enforcement were part of this conspiracy? You can't kill me, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. I'm already supposed to be dead. Another body will raise questions. Actually, it won't. Rourke pulled out his phone and showed her a video. This is live footage from your apartment building. Watch. On the screen, she could see a figure in dark clothing climbing the fire escape to her old apartment. The person was roughly her size and build, wearing clothes similar to what she'd worn the night she was kidnapped. Meet Delphine Cross, Rourke said. Or rather, meet her again. She's been our guest for 6 months now. Properly motivated. She do anything we ask. Rhiannon watched in horror as the figure broke into her apartment through the window. You're going to make it look like I faked my death, came back for something I left behind, and then got surprised by a burglar. Very tragic. The official investigation will conclude that Rhiannon Vale, serial killer, died in a struggle with one of her intended victims who fought back. He pocketed the phone, all loose ends tied up neatly. But as Rourke talked, Rhiannon noticed something he had missed. The tiny LED light on his phone was still blinking, still recording, and she could see the reflection of another phone screen in the cracked mirror behind. Captain Montgomery Ashford stepped out of the shadows, his weapon drawn and pointed at Rourke's head. Actually, Cassian, I think there are still a few loose ends to deal with. Rourke spun around, his hand moving toward his gun, but Ashford was faster. Don't even think about it. Hands where I can see them. Montgomery, how did you find you? Your boy Hendley has been feeding information to the FBI, but he's been feeding it to me as well. Ashford kept his weapon trained on Rourke, while addressing the other 2 officers, weapons on the ground. Now, you're making a mistake, Captain, one of them said. There's a lot of money in this, enough for everyone. The only mistake I made was not seeing what you were doing sooner. Ashford's voice carried the weight of command, and the 2 officers reluctantly placed their weapons on the concrete floor as Ashford cut Rhiannon's bonds. She rubbed her wrists where the rope had cut into her skin, almost the same marks she'd had after escaping from Kresh. The real Agent Nakamura, she asked, is coordinating raids on 17 locations across the state as we speak. Banks, safe houses, corrupt officials. We've been building this case for months, and your evidence was the final piece we needed. Through the broken windows of the processing plant, Rhiannon could see the flashing lights of police cars and FBI vehicles surrounding the building, not local police. She could see the federal plates and unmarked vans of a major operation. Delphine Cross, she asked, thinking of the woman being used to stage her fake return to the apartment. Is safe, Ashford assured her. Agent Knock. People intercepted her 3 blocks away. She's traumatized but alive. Like you, she'll need time to heal, but she'll make it. As federal agents swarmed into the building to arrest Rourke and his accomplices, Rhiannon found herself thinking about the other victims, the 37 women whose lives had been stolen, whose families had never learned the truth. Will they ever be found? She asked Ashford as they walked toward the waiting ambulances. Some of them. The investigation is just beginning, and it's going to reach into places we haven't even imagined yet. But yes, some of them will finally go home. 6 months later, Rhiannon Vale sat in a federal courthouse, watching as the last of Rourke's network received their sentences. The conspiracy had reached into 3 states and involved 47 people. including judges, politicians, and business leaders. The human trafficking operation had been completely dismantled, and 12 women had been rescued from locations as far away as Mexico and Canada. Captain Ashford, now promoted to deputy chief of a reformed Millbrook Police Department, found her in the courthouse cafe after the final sentencing. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "Better," she said honestly. "The nightmares are getting less frequent. The therapy helps. And the book." Rhiannon smiled for the first time in months. She had spent the last half-year working with a true crime author to tell the complete story of the conspiracy, not just her own experience, but the stories of all the victims. The book would be published next month, with all proceeds going to organizations that helped trafficking survivors. "It's called The Longest Night," she said. "I hope it helps other women recognize the warning signs, trust their instincts." "It will," Ashford assured her. "Your courage saved lives, Rhiannon. Not just your own, but all the women who won't become victims because this network is gone." As she walked out of the courthouse into the afternoon sunlight, Rhiannon thought about survival and justice, about the thin line between victim and hero. She had escaped from more than just a kidnapper that night in the warehouse. She had escaped from a system designed to silence women like her, to make them disappear without a trace. But she hadn't just escaped, she had fought back. And in fighting back, she had given a voice to 37 women who could no longer speak for themselves. The nightmare was over, but the healing for her, for the other survivors, for a community that had to rebuild trust in its institutions was just beginning, and that, Rhiannon knew, was exactly how it should be.